Luis Garavito is a Colombian serial killer who was convicted of killing at least 138 boys between 1992 and 1999. He is known as one of the most prolific serial killers in history, and his crimes shocked the world. Luis Garavito's childhood and family? Luis Garavito's killing spree? Why Luis Garavito committed such heinous crimes? Luis Garavito's modus operandi. How Luis Garavito's got caught. Trail and imprisonment. Everything you want to know about this case is in this video. Welcome back to Mighty River. Garavito was born on January 25, 1957, in Genova, Quindío, Colombia. He was the oldest of 7 brothers and grew up in a poor family. Garavito's childhood was marked by abuse and poverty, and he dropped out of school at the age of 16 to support his family. Garavito's father was a heavy drinker who physically abused his wife and children, including Luis. Garavito witnessed his father's abuse of his mother and experienced physical abuse himself. Garavito's father was also known to have extramarital affairs and was often absent from home. This put a lot of strain on the family, and Luis was forced to drop out of school at the age of 16 to help support his family financially. Despite these difficult circumstances, Garavito was said to be a good student, and some of his teachers noted that he was intelligent and creative. However, his family's financial situation prevented him from continuing his education. Garavito's troubled childhood and the abuse he suffered at the hands of his father are believed to have contributed to his later criminal behavior. Psychologists and criminologists have suggested that childhood trauma and abuse can lead to violent and criminal behavior in some individuals. Luis Garavito's killing spree began in the early 1990s and lasted until 1999. During this time, he preyed on young boys, usually between the ages of 8 and 16, who were living on the streets. He would lure them away with promises of food or money and then torture and sexually assault them before killing them. He would often dismember their bodies and scatter their remains across remote areas. His victims were primarily from poor and marginalized communities, and many were orphans or runaways. He was able to avoid detection for many years by moving from place to place and targeting victims who were unlikely to be missed or reported missing. It is believed that Garavito killed at least 138 boys, although some estimates put the number closer to 300. He was finally arrested in 1999, after a survivor of one of his attacks was able to identify him to the authorities. Garavito confessed to killing 140 boys and was convicted of 138 murders in 2000. Garavito's killing spree is considered one of the most horrific and disturbing in history, and it has had a profound impact on Colombian society. His case has brought attention to the issue of child abuse and neglect in the country, and many have called for greater efforts to protect vulnerable children from predators like Garavito. The reasons why Luis Garavito committed such heinous crimes are not fully understood, but several factors have been suggested by experts. One possible explanation is that Garavito suffered from a personality disorder or mental illness that made him unable to control his violent impulses. Others have suggested that his traumatic childhood, including the abuse he suffered at the hands of his father, may have contributed to his criminal behavior. It has also been suggested that Garavito's crimes were motivated by a desire for power and control over his victims, as well as a twisted sense of sexual gratification. Some experts believe that he may have been motivated by a deep-seated hatred of society and a desire to seek revenge against those who he perceived as having wronged him. Regardless of the reasons behind his crimes, Luis Garavito's actions were horrific and have had a lasting impact on the families and communities of his victims. His case serves as a reminder of the devastating consequences of violence and the importance of addressing the underlying factors that can lead to criminal behavior. Luis Garavito's modus operandi involved luring young boys who were living on the streets with promises of food, money, or gifts. He would gain their trust and then abduct them, taking them to isolated areas where he would torture, sexually assault, and kill them. Garavito's preferred method of killing was strangulation, but he also used other methods, such as cutting their throats or stabbing them. He would often dismember the bodies and scatter the remains in remote areas to avoid detection. Garavito was known to change his appearance and identity frequently, using different names and disguises to avoid being caught. He would also move frequently from place to place, which made it difficult for authorities to track him down. Garavito's crimes were characterized by extreme violence and cruelty, and his modus operandi was carefully planned and executed. His case is considered one of the most horrific and disturbing in history, and it has had a profound impact on Colombian society. Luis Garavito was finally caught in 1999, after a survivor of one of his attacks was able to identify him to the authorities. The survivor was a 16-year-old boy who had been abducted and tortured by Garavito, but had managed to escape. The survivor provided the police with a description of his attacker, and they were able to create a composite sketch based on his testimony. The sketch was widely circulated, and eventually someone recognized Garavito and reported him to the authorities. Garavito was arrested in April 1999, and he initially denied any involvement in the crimes. However, he eventually confessed to killing 140 boys and provided detailed information about his crimes and victims. Luis Garavito's trial was one of the longest and most complex in Colombian history, lasting for several years. Prosecutors presented evidence from hundreds of crime scenes and interviewed dozens of witnesses, including survivors of Garavito's attacks and the families of his victims. In 2000, Garavito was convicted of 138 counts of murder and sentenced to 1,853 years in prison, the maximum sentence allowed under Colombian law. However, due to a law that caps the amount of time a person can spend in prison at 40 years, Garavito is unlikely to serve his full sentence. Garavito is currently serving his sentence in a high-security prison in Colombia. He is reportedly kept in isolation for his own safety, as he has been targeted by other inmates who see him as a symbol of evil. Despite his imprisonment, the impact of Garavito's crimes continues to be felt in Colombia and beyond. His case has brought attention to the issue of child abuse and neglect, and has inspired efforts to protect vulnerable children from predators like Garavito. It has also raised questions about the effectiveness of the criminal justice system in addressing crimes of such magnitude.